Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for joining our program today. I'm Larry Hanson, the Executive Director of GMA. It's an exciting time for Georgia cities, as just days ago, the U.S. Treasury Department released the interim final rule with guidance for cities of all sizes regarding how to access and use the coronavirus local fiscal recovery funds provided in the American Rescue Plan Act. Today, our goal is to share the latest information available on Treasury's initial guidance, to update you on the allocations, the eligible uses, the reporting requirements, and the suggestions for how city leaders can plan to put these funds to work in your community. We also have the opportunity to hear from experts from our partners at the National League of Cities and the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, who will offer suggestions on the immediate steps cities should take to prepare to draw down funds and provide further clarification on the guidance as it stands today. Based on the nearly 500 registered attendees we have on the line today, we know that this is an issue of great importance to city officials, and GMA is going to be here to empower cities to maximize these funds and put them to good work to support your operations, your residents, and your businesses. We've got a lot of material to cover today, so before I begin with an overview of the Act and what's in it for Georgia cities, I'll take a couple of minutes to quickly recognize and introduce our guest speakers. A couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. Please remember, part of our goal here today is hear your questions. So to help us manage and respond to your questions, please put those in the Q&A during the meeting. We will do our very best to address all questions live, and we will also compile a Q&A following the event to be in GMA's ARP webpage. Also, oftentimes I'm on calls and someone says, hello, my name is, and a question goes in the chat box, will this presentation be available? Yes, it will. The presentation, the recording will be available later tonight, and also this slide presentation will be made available from all of our presenters tonight as well. So to get us started, I'm delighted to welcome several people that will be speaking later in the program. Stephanie Beck, who is Deputy Director of the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget. Stephanie has 15 years of experience with the state. Most of those are with OPB, but she's also worked in the Senate Budget and Evaluation Office. Prior to coming to the state, she worked as a congressional staff member for 2 congressmen. She's a proud double dog from UGA and obtained her master's degree in public administration. Joining Stephanie is Jen Wade, OPB grant manager. Jen has nearly a decade of experience in grants management. She's managed federal and state grant funds for programs under the Burn JAG program, the COPS program, the State Homeland Security, and many others. She has extensive experience in this area in both private sector grant programs and public. She began her public service career at the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, which is Georgia's agency for numerous federal and state grant programs. She then worked for the GEMA and the Homeland Security, and finally to Georgia Bureau of Investigation, where she managed multi-million-dollar projects to support Georgia's efforts to build and sustain law enforcement terrorism prevention capabilities. Jen came to OPB a little over 2 months ago to manage their grant programs, and she holds 2 master's degrees from Georgia State University. Also joining us today is Mike Gleason, who's the legislative manager for the National League of Cities. Mike covers a broad array of topics, including finance and tax policy for NLC's advocacy team. He's got 9 years of experience on Capitol Hill as a reporter and also a congressional staffer for a member of the House Representatives Tax Writing and Budget Committees. And this opportunity would not have been possible without the hard work of Mike and all of the NLC advocacy team. We're glad to have him here today to lend his expertise. So welcome, Mike, Jen, and Stephanie, and we look forward to hearing you later in the hour. I am now going to cover slides 1 through 5 before handing this off to Becky Taylor, and then we'll go through a progression of speakers. Basically, there's our cover slide. Just to get us started, we are here to help you with the American Rescue Plan Act and share information with you. Obviously, you all are aware that this is urgent funding that's been provided to help stabilize our government operations, household, and small businesses. This act became law on March 11th. For the first time in history, all 19,000 municipal governments are entitled to a direct, non-competitive federal formula grant from the U.S. Treasury Department. Direct funding means that all cities, towns, and villages in America are entitled to a federal grant from this fund, and they are obligated to municipalities. This obligation is not in any way mingled with aid that is designated are obligated to state or county government. So it's a very positive thing with direct funding. To tell you the magnitude of this, there is almost $3.5 billion coming to the local governments of Georgia. That is $551 million to cities over 50,000, $856 million to those under 50,000, a little over $2 million to counties, and a total of $1.4 billion, I should say, to cities. So that's almost $3.5 billion coming to the local governments of Georgia. To put that in perspective, the CARES Act provided about $371 million to the local governments of Georgia. So this is a massive amount of funding, and we're delighted that it's going to be here to help our cities and counties and local governments as we continue to address the after effects of the pandemic. The final allocations for metropolitan cities have been released. Metro cities, which there are 23 in Georgia, can actually begin drawing down or requesting their funds now. And the guidance for all the other cities, which are referred to as non-entitlement units of government, including their allocations and receiving instructions, is expected to be released in the coming days, hopefully in the next day or two. The framework for this interim rule that's been given kind of divides this into three categories. There is information on the non-exclusive list of allowable expenditures. So those things that are not all-inclusive, that clearly tell you what areas, what categories, what specifically is allowed. And then there's also areas that are encouraged for expenditure, whether that be designated census tracts or those populations that have been most disproportionately affected. And then the third category is those expenditures that are prohibited. The U.S. Department of Treasury has released a number of things. We are providing this to you that will have an actual link so that you can read the interim final rule, that you'll have access to a frequently asked questions document, that you will see the allocations for the metro cities over 50,000. That's 14 metropolitan statistical areas and 9 other cities who are not MSAs but have a population over 50,000. And then finally, the portal is there available for metropolitan cities to apply for funding. And all the information and updates can be found also on the Treasury website, which all you need to do is click on that link. I want to mention this as well. Preparing for this time, GMA, along with the National League of Cities and others, we have been afforded the opportunity to provide comments to Treasury, and we have done that on your behalf. And I'm very pleased to say that a number of points that GMA and NLC have raised did turn out to be in these final rules, and we think it's making it much better for cities. We're going to continue to provide guidance. You'll hear more about that today. You need to share your issues, concerns with us, because there will continue to be updated guidance all the way into July, and we need to share as you experience things with Treasury so that we can do the best we can to support you. With that said, I'm now going to hand it off to Becky Taylor, who is going to cover a part of the presentation, and then we'll go through a series of other speakers. So, Becky?
Thank you, Larry. I am going to go over some of the guidance in the information that was released last Monday. The framework of the interim rule, just to give you an overview, includes non-exclusive lists of allowable expenditures. And as Larry alluded to, it does include intervention for qualified census tracts. Later in the presentation, we'll give you the link for how you can look up whether a census tract is in a qualified area. It includes public health, direct aid, community and economic development and infrastructure. There are also encouraged and prohibited expenditures, as Larry mentioned. The key purpose of this legislation is to help with the public health emergency and with all the impacts to your community, either the economic impacts or the public health impacts. So that's the overarching goal of the and the intent of the legislation. So the framework to assess eligibility for projects and services. First, you want to look at the harmful effect of the COVID-19 that the activity will address, and you'll have to make sure that it relates to the pandemic. Assess the causal or compounding connection, assess for disproportionate impact on distressed sectors or population, and determine how to prove the expense produces the expected outcome. Before we get into too much more detail, there are a few dates that we wanted to point out that are really key to understand. One is emergency or public health emergency, and that is January 27th, 2020, which is going to be in the guidance, in the interim final rule and the FAQ that you'll see, anytime you see public health emergency, it relates to this January 27th, 2020 date. March 3rd, 2021 is the covered period referenced in eligible uses. So for the most part, the legislation and the intended use of funds is forward-looking. So most of the expenses that would be eligible would be for anything that occurred March 3rd, 2021 and forward. The reason that we included January 27th here, we'll get into it a little bit more later, is if you're talking about premium pay, there is a provision where you can go retroactive with that pay back to the date of the public health emergency. So you may want to keep that in mind. Also, as Larry mentioned, we're in a comment period right now. The Federal Register published this interim final rule on the 16th of May, so we have 60 days to provide comments. We definitely want to get your questions, and we will be gathering those in the Q&A today, so thank you for putting those in there. If we don't get to everything today, we'll just pull all those off there and make sure that we take a look at them, and if we can't answer them, then we're going to share them with Treasury. They want to know, how we can facilitate getting these funds to you and make it easier for you. December 31st, 2024 is the date by which the funds must be incurred or obligated. And that's important to know too. When you're planning how to use these funds, just keep in mind, there is not any urgency to use these funds within the next 2 or 3 weeks. This is not the same situation as we had with CARES. You have until December 31st, 2024 to obligate. You have until December 31st, 2026 as your period of performance. So if you have an infrastructure project, you have until that time frame and that deadline to complete the projects that you fund with fiscal recovery funds. Receiving funds, just some general information. As Larry alluded to, there are kind of 2 categories for cities receiving these funds. The first is metropolitan cities, and that is the large cities in Georgia, 23 large cities, over 50,000. That metropolitan category will be able to obtain funds directly from Treasury. Portal's already open, as Larry mentioned, and we'll provide the link in just a moment here. The other category is non-entitlement units of local governments, and that's the remaining. That's everybody else in Georgia. Generally, it's cities under 50,000, and most cities are in that category. For every city, the funds will go out in kind of 2 rounds. The first round will be, you'll get 50% upfront provided beginning May 2021, and the balance will be delivered approximately 12 months later. Metro cities, as I mentioned, they can begin applying through the portal now. And then metro cities will receive their second round 12 months after they receive their first round. NEUs will receive their money from their respective states, speaking nationwide, within 30 days of the dates receiving the money, and then the second payment will come 12 months later. We are happy that we have the OPB team here today to talk about how the NEUs will be able to get their funds, and we'll go into much more detail in a little while on that. I wanted to show you a snapshot of the metropolitan cities allocations, and I know that I've touched base with basically everybody on this list, especially the 6 highlighted cities. There were estimates put out by the Congressional Research Office early on, back in March, right before the rule actually became law. Before the plan became law, that showed estimates for these larger communities. When the allocations came out from Treasury last week, there was a marked difference in some of the communities. And these 6 saw a range decrease from estimates to allocation anywhere from like 40% to 73%. So that's a pretty significant change. And we have been working with NLC, with the Treasury Department, with the White House staff to try to get transparency and clarification about that. We're continuing to work on that. We just want to understand the math, because we don't understand the methodology that they used to explain their final numbers. And they have pledged to provide that feedback and that guidance to us, and we're continuing to wait to hear from them on that. We understand that there will be a call in the next few days with Treasury staff just to address this issue and other questions that we have. As Larry mentioned, the NEU cities allocation will be later this week, and we know that those estimates are going to be different than the final allocations. One thing that you need to keep in mind is if you're looking at that estimate list for your cities and you're an NEU, you're going to be capped at 75% of your most recent budget. That's included in the interim final rule, and I've just cut and pasted the guidance here on that about the definition of what your total annual operating budget is. So We are working with Treasury on all of this information. It is kind of a work in progress, and we think that's why it's taken a couple more days than we thought for the Treasury to get the NEU's estimates out, because they have to be able to clarify and explain their methodology for all cities. Just a few steps for metro cities to receive your funds. All these instructions are available at the link that Larry provided earlier on the Treasury website. These are just the steps and the things that you'll have to provide. I have had a couple cities that have gone into the portal already, and I know an official in one city said basically they had to give a DNA sample to get the information, but you do have to provide quite a bit of information, your banking account. You have to certify that you are who you are, your taxpayer ID number, your DUNS number, the name of your authorized contact person, and so forth. They're just trying to make sure that they have all the information they need to be able to expedite getting those funds to you quickly. So just be sure to review those guidelines before you jump on that portal so that you'll be familiar with what you have to have ready. Metro cities jurisdictions, please keep in mind you do have to submit a request through the portal, even if you have applied for other programs through the Treasury submission portal in the past. And eligible jurisdictions will receive further communications regarding the status of your submission after you enter all the information in the portal. So you'll get an email back from Treasury that explains what your next steps will be. I'm going to skip the slides that we have here, but they will be included in the materials that will be posted on our website later this evening. These slides will be available, so you can go back and look at them. But I would urge you to look at the slides that Stephanie and Jen are going to be reviewing later, because they'll provide you with detailed information about the information that OPB is requesting from cities. I know we've been in communication with you all this week about that, but they'll go over that in detail later, and we'll be happy to respond to any questions. So that covers that portion of the guidance. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Terrell Jacobs, and he's going to go through some eligible uses of these funds. Terrell?
Thank you, Becky, and hope everybody can hear me. Am I coming out good? Okay. Eligible uses. So obviously, we've lived through the first portion of these fundings with the CARES Act. So a lot of the funding in regards to this ARP is similar to that, with the negative impacts to assist households, small businesses, nonprofits in relationship to that. So no more restrictive than the CARES Act in that regard. So also we're looking at workers for essential workers in regards to that. So there'll be provisions in there to allow municipalities to provide up to $13 per hour for those individuals for premium pay in that regard. But that will be covered period beginning March the 3rd, 2021, as Becky has stated. Other provisions of this, as you've heard about the non-entitlement units and the metropolitan cities, most of the fiscal year of those individual cities, they may have had some revenue loss. So this is an opportunity. We did not have that in the previous CARES funding. So this would be a new situation for funding opportunity. So that would be a applicable opportunity for those individual cities to seek that. Also to make necessary investment for water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. And I'll go a little deeper into that. Next slide. So obviously to respond to public health emergencies, response to the disease, here are some of the mitigating opportunities that you have: medical expenses, behavior health, health disparity, survival benefits, all those things. One of the things that we are trying to keep pressing to a lot of our cities is, really think globally comprehensive about this in regards to what you're going to need for now and in the future in regards, because there's still going to be some negative impact from the coronavirus several years from now. So next slide. So getting into the issues about what Becky mentioned about the qualified census tract, there will be a ability to get that information to determine, because once again, we want to hit those areas that are more, shall we say, challenged communities. So there will be some opportunities for direct cash and loan interventions, assistance with businesses, nonprofits, homelessness, childcare, education. Those are type of opportunities that you can look at in regards to that. So once again, think beyond just today, what potential impact this is going to make going forward. And then there'll be more information on this. It's actually on page 18 in the final rule and also in the FAQ in that regard. So next slide. So workforce, one of the issues is the workforce. So you need to look at your overall workforce and look at there's a situation of premium pay for those eligible individuals. And that ranges from all these that are described thereof. And within, municipal government, there are definitely a lot of those individual positions that are essential workers that you might prescribe in regards to this premium pay. So that's just an opportunity for you. I know we've already had some questions about this from cities inquiring about that. So opportunity there. Next slide. Moving on into personnel, as we got highlighted here, the definition of premium pay also clarified that premium pay may be provided retrospectively for work performed at any time since the COVID-19 public health emergency. So that goes back to January the 27th, 2020. So once again, an opportunity to capture some of those premium pay payments that you have made in that regard. So I know that was not the case in regards to the CARES Act, but I think the Treasury Department did a great job of making this a little bit more broader to have you have that opportunity. So eligible uses, when it gets down to some infrastructure pieces, water and sewer projects, that has been one I've actually heard from several cities. A lot of that hidden infrastructure, our liquid assets have been, shall we say, addressed, impacted by this. So here's your opportunity to seek funding for those projects. And it also includes managing and treatment of your stormwater. I know some communities have combined sewer and stormwater system. That is a great opportunity to leverage these dollars in that regard. Those are projects eligible under the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and also the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So these are great opportunities for you to seek those funding. Also, cyber attack. I know several cities have been impacted by that. Climate control, resilience, lead service line replacement. I know that we have a lot of cities, once again, with water lines that are 70 to 100 years old. So there's a great opportunity to replace those for the future. Also, here's the opportunity in regards to any construction that you may be doing with water, sewer, stormwater, broadband infrastructure that continues past December the 31st and assume funds that may have been obligated or encumbered prior to that date. Yes, you'll be able to continue with that project and allow those expenditures or encumbrances to take place. Now, the period of performance will run until December 31st, 2026. So you'll have until that time to complete those projects in regards to that. So giving you ample enough time to hopefully get those underway so that hopefully you can get those addressed for your community. Now, here's a big one that is out there on the horizon. One of the biggest impacts that I think we've been faced with, notwithstanding, is broadband. There is a lot of underserved areas, as we have found in the state of Georgia. And these funds are definitely a game changer with also the aspect of what the state has done infusing monies to help with this. And so we have a lot of ISPs, internet service providers, who are looking for partners or looking for opportunities to work with communities and expanding their broadband. So if there are projects out there that gets you in a situation that they are underserved, are addressing issues of lower speeds in regards to their bandwidth, this is a great opportunity. So eligible projects are dealing with different issues as far as connectivity, last mile, those types of things in that regard. We are hearing about some of the ISPs out there that are looking for communities to talk with them about the opportunity to do a private-public partnership. So just do your homework. There's also money coming down from the NTIA in regards to federal funding for technical assistance and also broadband expansion. So there are several pots of funding for broadband that is going to be coming down the pipe here shortly. So please look out for that opportunity and work with your local communities, such as healthcare, education, to broaden that scope for your community. I think this is the last slide that I have. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Mike Gleason of NLC, and let you take it away, sir.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about the lost revenue. And this is probably one of the key things that a lot of cities are really focused on at this point. So in the interim final rule, it talks about the calculations. As you can see, it identifies, there's a 4-step calculation that you go through. And you look at this at 4 points in time: December 31st, 2020, December 31st, 2021, 2022, and 2023. So what you do, and we've been having internal conversation with Government Finance Officers Association, is that you calculate all of your revenue from January 1 to December 31st, 2020. So there will be accruals that will not roll into that, and your fiscal years may be somewhat different. If you're on a July 1 to June 30th fiscal year, you may have the issue of not being able, not having an audited financials and only going on the month by month. But that's how the Treasury wants this to be done. So anyway, the first step in terms of trying to identify the lost revenue is looking at the public health emergencies last fiscal year and identifying the revenues collected in that year. It's called the base year. Now, step 2 is the counterfactual. So in here, you'll see the formula. And basically what this is the counterfactual is trying to understand how much growth that you will have versus, and they give you either 4.1% to choose from, or they give you your last 3 fiscal years, average fiscal years, whichever is higher. And then you take that as the counterfactual, and basically says, you will try to project out your revenue in absence of this pandemic. So in step 3, you identify your actual revenues for each year, as I said, 20, 21, 22, and 23. And that you collected over the last 12 months. So for that first one, if you have December 31st, 2020, it's from January 1 to December 31, 2020 is the collection, is the figuring out the actual revenues collected. And then step 4 is the extent to which the reduction in revenue is equal to the counterfactual less for the actual revenue. So basically what this is saying is if your counterfactual is higher than your actual revenue, then you have lost revenue. If your actual revenue exceeds your counterfactual, what you should have gotten based on if nothing had happened, then you set your lost revenue for that year equal to 0. Next slide, please. So for the provision, basically the general revenue draws on the census definition of own source revenue. And it basically, you sum it across all revenue streams. So what this does is this is administratively easier and it's more, it's easier for Treasury and for everybody else. So there's not different types and different funds coming into this. But one of the big problems, and we've talked to this in a number of different states, is that utilities are left out. So if you have your own utility district and they are a net positive to your budget, you cannot count that revenue towards the general revenue definition in this. We are working to get more flexibility and trying to work with Treasury to get that changed. Next slide, please. So this is an example that I put together for a call that we did last week, and I'll walk you through this, and hopefully this is clear. So City X has $100 in revenue in the base year, the last year before the full fiscal year 2020. City X finds that it has a 4.1% growth, counterfactual growth rate, which is higher than the annual 3 full fiscal years prior to the pandemic. So you have your choice. Again, it's either the annual revenue growth of the 3 full fiscal years prior to the pandemic, or 4.1%, whichever one is higher. So the base year for City X ends June 30th, 2019. And City X has 18 months from the end of its base year, June 2019, to December 31st, 2020, and its projected revenue would be $106.20. Now, the way that you get there is that you have to do the math and you have to do the brackets first, otherwise the math doesn't work. It's 1 plus the counterfactual, so whatever the growth rate is, in this one, it's 4.1%, raised to the power of n, which is the number of months, divided by 12, which is the number of months per year. So because there is 6 months plus from June 2019 to January, you get 6, plus the 12 months from from January to December. That's how you get the 18. Now, if City X has $80 of actual revenue in 2020, the loss is $106.20 minus 80, or $26.2. If the actual exceeds collected, as I said, there's no lost revenue. Now, if you go, the interim final rule was posted online, so the paid numbers are no longer there. But if you had printed it out last week, one of the things that it says is that the recovery funds for the provision are for the provision of government services, and it is a non-inclusive list, and I can run through those real quick. So the maintenance of PAYGO funded buildings for infrastructure, including roads, and PAYGO funded buildings, meaning the practice of funding capital projects with cash on hand from taxes, fees, grants, or other sources. Modernization of cybersecurity, including hardware, software, or the protection of critical infrastructure. Health services, environmental remediation, school or educational services, and the provision of fire, police, and public safety services. But fire, police, and public safety services can also come under the first category, C1A, which allows you to offset the revenue or offset the public safety costs in that as well. So you don't necessarily have to use the lost revenue to offset public safety costs. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Becky.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And I'll just quickly go through the remainder of our slides. Just first, I want to touch on the ineligible uses. The legislation prohibits cities from using this for federal matching requirements, so you can't use this on to provide a match for another federal grant or loan. You can't use it for pensions. You cannot use it for infrastructure that's not directly addressed in ARPA. And it's not allowed to be used for rainy day funds, financial reserves, and outstanding debt. Again, with the open comment period, we would like to get your feedback on all this. Reporting requirements. Treasury has promised to put out more detail on their reporting requirements, but right now we know that metropolitan cities will have to provide an interim report and a quarterly project and expenditures report thereafter. Metro cities with a population in excess of 250,000 will also be required to submit an annual recovery performance plan to Treasury. NEUs will not have to provide those interim or recovery performance report, but they will be required to submit an annual project and expenditure report. Treasury is trying to make this as simple as possible. One of the things that NLC and GMA and all the other state leagues across the country have tried to convey to Treasury staff is just how small most of our communities are. We are, in Georgia, a state of small cities for the most part, who have not had a lot of experience maybe dealing with federal funds. So they're trying to simplify the processes to the extent possible. And so we're trying to make sure that record keeping will not be burdensome to any of our communities, but particularly to the small ones. I wanted to highlight one of the questions in the FAQ and just say what a great resource that is, because I found a lot of answers to questions that cities have posed here, but the records that have to be kept, as far as retaining records, you'll have to retain your records for a period of 5 years after all funds have been expended or returned to Treasury, whichever is later. So 5 years. At first, early on, before we got the guidance, we didn't know if you would have to keep up with your records for indefinitely, but 5 years is the period that they've identified in the interim final rule. Just a couple of things I'll mention based on the information that National League of Cities has been sharing is that When you submit your requests for funds, local governments, you're going to have to bear the responsibility to decide whether projects fall under the eligible category. So it's important to understand the guidance. It's also important to note that this is the initial guidance. We're in the early stages of this, everybody, and we're kind of just getting started with this. This is the first set of guidance, the first FAQ that Treasury has sent out. And this is a massive piece of legislation that's very complicated. And as Larry mentioned, the first time that all cities in the United States have been able to get these funds. So we do expect there to be updates. Please pay attention and go to the Treasury website and sign up for email updates from them, and pay attention to NLC GMA's updates, because we're going to be sharing all kinds of news on any new guidelines that come out. And those, again, just Treasury is inviting comments, so make sure to take a look at those and let us know what feedback you have. We'll be submitting comments, or your city can also submit those as well. Treasury has pledged to provide technical assistance to help with administrative burden, and they have an email address here, slfrp@treasury.gov. We've submitted a couple of questions to that email address, and they provide a very prompt response. So if you have any questions that just need to go to Treasury, go ahead and send them to them, but you can also contact any of the GMA staff on the call, the consulting team members or me, and we'll be happy to try to help with your question. A couple of resources I wanted to point out. GMA's webpage, please look at this. This is your resource hub for information for Georgia cities, www.gacities.com/ARPA. We've got all the information here on guidance, allocations, some key resources that you'll need. Just take a look here, because this is where we'll put everything, including upcoming events. And as you look at these local fiscal funds, just keep in mind how special this is and how important it is, because this is going to be the last COVID relief bill that comes out. It's the last time that local governments are going to get a shot at federal fiscal relief. So it's really important to think about how you can use that for your government operations, for things that you weren't able to do over the last year due to the pandemic. And remember that this is a huge bill with $1.9 trillion in a number of different kind of pots of programs, from housing, childcare, nutrition, all sorts of different things. So take a look at those existing grant programs where the federal funds will be going. And I'll show you a slide in a minute that NLC prepared, which is a great kind of matrix that breaks all that out. And see if there's some other programs that you may be able to draw on in addressing your community's needs. Just as one example, the Department of Community Affairs has received about $1 billion in federal assistance between ARPA and the end-of-year appropriations last year for landlords and utility customers to get help with rental assistance. There's still a lot of money sitting in that account, and we need to make sure that our customers and that our landlords know that that information is there, and that all they have to do is go to this website, click this link, and request assistance. And it's right there. DCA has set up an excellent, easy-to-use portal. So that's one way that you might be able to help members of the community without tapping into your local fiscal relief funds. So just consider that when you're doing your planning. As I said, there's no urgency to spend these funds, next week or next couple of weeks. So there is time to plan and time to be thoughtful about how you can use all these funds accessible to your community. This is the NLC link that I referenced that shows kind of a grid of funding in different areas. And I've got a link to this later in the presentation. So just stay in touch with us, with National League of Cities, and make sure to just let us know if you have any questions. Keep in mind that there are some immediate fixes that are needed, and we've alluded to those. NLC is preparing some excellent fact sheets that kind of unpack the 151-page interim final rule, so you won't have to go through that whole document. You can just kind of see a summary of each piece. As I mentioned, Treasury is going to have a call with city officials later this week, and we will notify everybody of that. And then there's another GMA training webinar scheduled for next Wednesday at 4 p.m. We're really hoping that we'll get some additional guidance on NEUs prior to that time, so we'll be able to get into the weeds a little bit on that. This is the links that we'd like to share with you, and hope you'll take our presentation back and take a look at the information in those links. And then I also I got to put in a plug for National League of Cities because we would not be here today without their assistance. GMA worked really hard. City officials in Georgia worked really hard to tell your stories, and that's, important to how we were able to get these funds direct to cities. But National League of Cities led this discussion. They're on the Hill every single day. They know everybody there. They have all the contacts to the experts and resources in DC. So I encourage you all, if your city is not a member, to take a look at becoming a member, because you've seen already today with Mike being here and with the resources that we've referenced, that there are tons and tons of information on the NLC website that you can benefit from. So please check that out. And that really concludes all my slides. I will share this information in the chat too. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie and Jen with OPB, and you all can take it away to share information about the OPB portal for any use.
Sure. Stephanie, did you want to say a couple of words before I start with the presentation?
I just want to appreciate everybody joining us today, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. Just keep in mind that things are coming at us fast and furious from Treasury, and there's still a lot of unknowns. So we're doing the best we can to unpack guidance as it's made available to us. And we're glad to help in any way that we can through this. So appreciate everybody's patience, but it is like drinking from a fire hose right now.
All right, so just to dive in here a little bit, I did answer some of the Q&A. I saw Stephanie also kind of got into that and sort of answering what we could there. So if you had questions that we could answer, there are some answers in that. And one of those addresses the portal. As Becky was saying, if you are a metropolitan city or a county, that you will go in and do the ID Me portal. And then for any use, all of that will be covered in here. So the forthcoming application process, which I will discuss, that will be in the grant, a different portal for you guys, and we'll kind of go through that. The email invite that was sent out will have all of that information there, but I'll recap that shortly. So the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, we're the prime recipients of the state and local fiscal recovery funds, the capital investment projects, and the emergency rental assistance program. Other funds that the Treasury has made available are being directly allocated to state and local entities. For this specific program, for the local fiscal recovery funds, I'm just going to try to go through. I'll try not to repeat what Larry and Becky have already kind of covered. We'll just go over a little bit of the eligibility, the award amounts. I'll kind of come through use of funding just very, very briefly, but since you guys have already touched on that. The application process, which is probably what you're most interested in, terms and condition, and then post-award. I do want to, however, highlight, we have a lot of this information already on our website. We have a dedicated website specific to the local fiscal recovery fund. I have actually added a lot of the FAQs from Treasury, the interim report that Becky and Larry are referring to that has a ton of information. That is also at the very top of the page. You'll see the important document section, and that is located there. Feel free to comb through that document. You know, we are still diving through it ourselves and going through that. So feel free to dig in there yourself, and that has everything that Becky kind of laid out. Again, like Becky said, so the eligibility are for this portion for our local fiscal recovery funds are NEUs. Those of you with a population of 50,000 or less. The award amounts, I also sent an email out to Treasury via the email that Becky was referring to, and they have been extremely responsive for the amount of volume of emails that they are receiving. They're being inundated. And so I reached out to them on a couple other things with reporting mechanisms and things like that. And they got back to me fairly quickly and let us know that they will be sending out allocations. Hopefully this should be this week. I told Stephanie this morning, watch them drop it, Friday afternoon at 4:30 and then leave it there all weekend. But with those allocations, they are expecting to release another FAQ guide specific to the NEU piece of this. So we will get a lot more answers, hopefully at the end of the week. So fingers crossed on that, but I think that will address a lot of your concerns. Again, this is coming at us hard and fast, like Stephanie mentioned, and we still have questions that we need answers to as well. So there is an $862 million that is available for any use. If you have seen any kind of allocation list thus far from anywhere else, just know that that has not come from Treasury. There are a couple of other agencies that have put together estimates. And some entities may be missing from that, and we are aware of that. So we are working through, we'll make sure that all of the entities are listed and confer that with Treasury before anything is pushed forward. So just to hit some of these, the state will be responsible for dispersing these funds to NEUs. Individual NEUs, the local government award amounts, obviously have not been released, and we're expecting this week. The total amount received by non-entitlement units of government may not exceed 75% of the most recent budgets as of January 27th, 2020. And for this requirement, in order for us to meet that requirement and for you guys to meet that requirement, we're just going to have all of the local government self-attest that the funding amount set forth by Treasury doesn't exceed that amount on the part of the application process. So you'll just self-attest to that to make sure that those funds don't exceed that amount. And as we push forth through that email, it's really, really important that cities complete all these proactive measures that we've sent out in order to make this process really efficient for us and us to transfer the funds in a timely manner. So a couple of Q&A questions where it asks if OPB thinks that they will meet their 30-day mark in dispersing these funds. That 30-day mark is from the date that we received those funds, and we have not received them yet. We are we're confident that we can meet that 30-day deadline as long as all of the stuff is done on the front end. So that's why it's so important for you guys to get your DUNS number and all of the stuff that we set out in the emails. Funds that are not dispersed to the NEUs within those 30 days are subject to being returned to the U.S. Treasury. Having said that, while we are required to disperse those funds within 30 days, we do have, the Treasury allows us to apply for a 30-day extension to account for any issues that we have. So we don't want you to panic. We do want to try to make it within the 30 days without having to do the extension, just to get it out to you guys for use. However, we can apply for that 30-day extension, and it's just contingent on Treasury, allowing us to accept that. Use of funding, I'm not going to harp too much on this because you guys went through it very, very succinctly. So these are just a couple of, these are the categories in which that you can use it. And then this is on our website as well. So if you go to our website, you will see in the body of the first landing page, all of these are there. So it just kind of gives you a couple of examples of use of funding and how to kind of fit them in the categories. We thought this was a pretty neat way of doing it, just to give everybody some examples. And then at the end, it talks about ineligible uses here. And again, these are all subject to change because Treasury, continues to evolve their guidance and everything. So if there's any changes in any of these, we will again update these on our website and try to send out some communication on those. All right, so here's the important part, right? So the application process, we have not begun that. Everything that we have sent out in the email, so we provided email instructions that went out to all of you. If you have not received your email, Becky has been doing a phenomenal job in tracking those of you that have not received your email yet. There are only a handful of you now from that list that have not received it, and is probably due to the attachments that are embedded because we had a lot of information to get to you, and so a lot of it may be getting quarantined. So please check your junk boxes and your spam. You can just do a generic search as well for local fiscal recovery fund. And that will pull, if it's in your junk box or spam, that should pull too. So try that, and please let Becky know if at the end of the day, if you've still not received that, once we're off this webinar, if you wouldn't mind just reaching out to her if you still don't have it. We are going to try something else if we don't, if the recipients have not gotten that by the end of the day. So the steps indicated in the email will make sure that we have as fast as a turnaround time as we can, which include that 30-day mark to distribute the funds to the NEUs. Upcoming application deadlines and turnaround time for payment of funds will be announced just as soon as we receive additional guidance from Treasury. So as soon as we know that and receive our funds, we will begin communications regarding the actual application process in the portal specifically for NEUs. Right. So again, if you're a metropolitan city or a county, you would use the Treasury's website and do the ID.me. If you received that email, some of you already had an account from previous funding. Some of you didn't. There were about 40 cities, I believe, that did not have an account set up in that portal. That is the portal that we are referring to on the OPB side. That is a specific grant portal that we have been doling out these funds for. And so when we say our portal, that portal, we are referring to this for the NEUs. So Treasury has indicated that the funds will be dispersed to the states in May for the NEUs. They just haven't given the exact date. With it being almost the end of May and the fact that they are going to distribute the allocation list this week, I anticipate it coming to us quickly. Treasury has been in contact with us, so I believe it will be, if not the end of this week, maybe next week. So again, we'll remain in contact with you on that. Once received, that's when our 30-day clock starts. In your emails, in order to make sure that this goes efficiently as possible, we need to have you guys on the front end go ahead and start the process of requesting a DUNS number. The reason we are asking you to do it early on the front end is because with all this funding stream being so large, DUNS has been inundated. If you've been on the website recently, you can tell that they're even changing their website, which is probably poor timing, but they've had a little bit of construction on their website as well. So we just want to avoid any major delays, glitches, and it could take up to 2 weeks for you guys to get that. And that is actually a reporting requirement for Treasury. In order for you guys to be in line with their reporting requirements, you have to have that DUNS number. So we're just trying to make sure all of it's done on the front end. In order to expedite the reward process, we're going to have GMA collect your entity's point of contact for signing on behalf of the municipality. Becky, did you send that out already? Has that email already gone out?
It's going to go out right after this
Okay.
webinar's over.
Perfect. So in order to, again, expedite this process, at the end of the grant application, the last step essentially would be terms and conditions signed by a designee that will sign on behalf of your municipality. And so if you want to have your terms and conditions sent to anyone other than the point of contact that we have, that we sent the initial email to, or your mayor, please send an email over to Becky. Well, she'll send an email out giving you the instructions. So please read that through and just make sure that you submit that by the date. I believe she put on there Friday, by close of business Friday, but whatever date is there, please follow the instructions there and get that email back to them as soon as possible. Because if you don't send us that, it can also lead into delays in receiving the funding too. Just a little bit of information on your DUNS number. So you must have this, again, to apply for funding and comply with the federal reporting requirements. You only need to provide the DUNS number in the forthcoming application process. So you don't need to have it on your vendor form. You don't need to have it on your W-9 or anything. There's been a lot of questions about where you put the DUNS number. So just once you've gotten that, just hang on to it. If you want to take a screenshot of it later to send to us, that's totally fine too. Just hang on that and you will use that number during your application process for the funds through the state and our portal. Your SAM account, this is not a requirement for us, but it will help you on the back end of all of your reporting requirements, because when you go in to actually do the quarterly reports, if you have the SAM number, it will link a lot of your information. So it makes it easier for you guys as well, and it makes it easier for our reporting aspect. So all one big team here, just trying to help you guys out. If you'll help us out, the SAM's account is very, very helpful. And again, that one it's a little bit longer turnaround times than the DUNS number. And with all of the influx and people trying to get one right now, I would go ahead and try to get it done this week if you can. I just want to say a little bit about that too. With the SAMs and the DUNS number, those are totally free to get. If you come across any website where it's telling you you can pay to expedite it or pay to get one, there are a lot of scams out there for DUNS and SAMs numbers, specifically to get it expedited. So just don't fall prey to that. Just wanted to put that out there. We had a lot of questions around our vendor management form. Christy is here with SAO, and so she can speak to some of the questions that you may have on this. So Christy, feel free to chime in if I get anything wrong or don't include anything. But in order for you to receive payment from the state, your entity has to be registered through the state, so through SAO. Even if you have a vendor account with the state, please submit a new one. We've had a lot of questions about that came through our inbox. The vendor number is going to remain the same, but there's going to be a different location for the specific grant program. I just put on here, just reminding people what you can gather to complete that form. And then through the instructions, just please remember, you only have to complete sections 2 through 5. Make sure you attach the W-9 before sending that over. And then place the words local fiscal recovery fund in the subject of the email and then reference it in the body, please. That way it gets to someone who's familiar with this program, and so it gets to them quickly. There's a whole lot of you, and so we're just trying to make this as easy as possible. And then this is the email that you will submit that to. Had a lot of these common questions over and over again in our inbox, so I just wanted to kind of share these with you. So again, you just complete sections 2 through 5. Section 2, you do not need the driver's license, only your tax ID. In section 5, if nothing is applicable to you, just leave it blank. That was a really big question we had. And then again, I highlighted earlier where I put my DUNS number, just hang on to that, and you'll need that during the actual application process. So post-award, after you've received the award, we are still awaiting guidance on reporting requirements. Again, we have addressed some of them that we've had in that interim report on some of the things that will be required from the data points, but we're really waiting on further guidance on this, specifically relating to, if the NEUs transfer the funds, then what happens with the reporting and whatnot. So please bear with us. We have the same questions that you have on that. We are just trying to make sure they're as clear as possible so that way we can share them with you in a clear form. And we will also, once we get those, we'll put it in our own kind of FAQ and then send that out for you. The NEUs, you guys will be required to report on an annual basis. As Becky stated, in order to meet those requirements, you will need that DUNS number. And then the transfers, which I've kind of gone over. We are still waiting on a lot of information to come back. So we'll open it up for a little bit of questions. If you have questions, you can send these. If it's an OPB related question that we can answer related to the local fiscal recovery fund, you can use this email address here and someone will get back to you. We have a really fast turnaround time on this. If you just want to peruse information and you just need a resource for this, we have all this laid out here. And then if you have a question or you're trying to submit your vendor form, you can reach out to SAO at this email address here. Anything that is related to that vendor form or your W-9, if you would please send that over to SAO. That is the best way to route that question, just because we're just going to route those to SAO anyway. We just don't have the answers to most of the questions if it's very specific on the vendor form. Stephanie and Christy, do you guys have anything to add?
Just one thing that I saw a couple of things in the chat about banking accounts. If you are creating a new banking account to hold these funds, we do need to make sure that you've provided that updated banking information to the state accounting office, because they will have to create a new pay location in our system and then notify us that that pay location changed. Otherwise, if we don't get that updated information, our system will automatically pay whatever account you used when we did the CRF round. So just to keep that in mind, even if you already have an account with us and you received money previously, if you're changing your banking information, we will need that updated information on our end.
Hi, Jennifer, this is Christy. The only addition that I wanted to make is regarding the turnaround time, just to let everybody know. We currently have over about 200 of these requests and more are coming every day. So just because you sent it last week, we are processing them every day. But please allow us at least about 2 weeks. Somebody will get back with you once we have approved or your request, or if we need additional information. Somebody from the vendor management group will let you know the status, but it's taking a little longer. So please just give us a little bit of time just to catch up, because as you're completing them and sending them in, we're getting a lot in at the same time. Thank you.
Yes, and I did see a question in the chat too about someone asked, they said they sent the form in and was that all in the process? For right now, yes, it is. So if you sent that over to SAO, they will get back to you, like Christy said, if there's anything that they need. But if you've submitted that in the W-9 form and you completed your DUNS, your SAMs, then you are good to go until we get to the application process.
Okay, thank you all, and thank all the presenters for sharing that information. We are going to take a few moments here. We are running a little bit over schedule to answer some questions. Many have been submitted in the Q&A. We have attempted to answer many of those as we've gone along, but we do have a panel here. I will say this to all of you. There's 151 pages of information. and we are all doing the best we can as you are. None of us are subject matter experts in this at this point. So we're going to do our best to answer your questions, and certainly those that we can't answer, we'll work to get you an answer. So just want to be sure that we all understand that this is new, it's evolving, and it's going to continue to evolve with new guidance going forward, at least through July. So with that said, Becky, Pam, how do we want to try and handle the Q&A? We've answered a lot of those questions. Are there some that you see that might be for a particular panelist we have not answered?
It looks like we have a few left that are still open. Most of them have been answered. There's one here: can budgeting for fiscal 2022 allow cities to reduce expected property tax delinquencies since shortfalls could be off? I'm not sure who might want to take that one.
Yeah, I'll take a shot and then Mike want to, but my understanding is there are going to be 4 opportunities to look at revenue replacement once each year for the next 4 years. So I would almost consider that as revenue replacement. If it's property tax money that you will not collect, that you budgeted, that to me would be something you could look at on a point in time each year for the next 4 years and make yourself whole as revenue replacement. Mike, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you're exactly right, Larry. I think that's the exact intent, is where some of these things, like you have the lagging indicators such as property taxes, will fall behind in a year, but you'll make that up in the following year when that gets picked up.
Right. And also one important thing we recommended, and we were glad Treasury approved, there was a question about what fiscal year they were going to use, and we had recommended that they allow each government to use their own fiscal year. So you do need to read it. Much of this is based on your fiscal year prior to January 27th, 2020. So that could be your June 30 year of 2019. So do keep that in mind. There's really 2 key dates in this legislation. One is that January date and one is a March date. But most all of it refers to your fiscal year prior to the start of the pandemic.
Okay, we've got a question here. I think this one would be for Jen. Does the council have to pass a resolution accepting the terms of ARP funding?
This is Stephanie, and I can field this one. I think it kind of depends on how you handled CRF. So we will send out a terms and conditions document for each locality to sign, just like we did with Coronavirus Relief Fund. So it should be up to your individual city's requirements as to what your council has to do to approve receiving these funds. It's not anything that the state is dictating to you. And Larry, you may be better able to speak to that than we can.
There was a question here, and I think, Christy, you said you're going to answer the one about whether you need to provide your bank information again, or did you already answer that?
I have not answered it, but just so everyone know, yes. If you already provided your bank account for another grant or submitted on a prior vendor management form for another reason, yes, we do ask that you provide your routing number and bank account on this current form, because we have everything consolidated by form. So it is needed. Please include your routing number and bank account again. Thank you.
Becky, what was the previous question that was referenced that was not answered?
Let me see. Trying to find my Q&A. It went away. But here.
Was it Stephanie?
This is related to the DUNS number and the SAMS number. Those are not required in this first step. And Jen, if you want to go into more detail, it just says the city has a DUNS number and a SAMS number, but the vendor form did not request that information. Will that be needed at a later time?
Yes, so that was part of the application process. So with the DUNS and the SAMS, if you already have that, you are good to go. Just hang on to that. We don't need your DUNS or SAMS just yet. You will get to that once we announce the application process and we get you guys in the portal to actually certify and apply for these funds, then you will need that.
Jen or Stephanie, I believe earlier one of you said I might answer a question, but I was trying to read the questions and I missed it. So which question was it?
It was this, Larry. Does the council have to pass a resolution accepting the terms of the ARP? And obviously, that's the question. And she stated that, they will send out that, but that's up to the city whether they want to proceed with that or not. So
I would agree. I don't see anything specifically, Mike, I would ask you, that requires it, but certainly I think it would be a good practice. But certainly whoever makes that application needs to have the authority from some source to request and receive this funding on behalf of the city.
Okay, I just see one more question in the chat or in the Q&A. Can funds be used for nonprofits such as parks and recreation and boys and girls clubs?
Yes, the legislation is clear that you can actually use a number of nonprofits, either directly or indirectly, but you could contract, for instance, with the United Way to handle rental assistance or mortgage assistance. Parks and recreation revenue replacement would be eligible. It's a government expenditure. Right now, the only ones we know that are not eligible are utilities, and we're trying to work to get that eligible. So park and recreation revenue replacement would be eligible. Also, it clearly says that authorities are eligible. So if you have, for instance, a tourism authority that relied on a motel hotel tax and it was down substantially, which many were, that authority would be eligible for revenue replacement for lost revenue from a hotel motel tax being underperforming. So I think you can look at airport authorities, loss of revenue from enplanements, deplanements, tourism authorities, any authority, economic development authorities. All authorities are a unit of government, therefore they're eligible.
We have another question for the OPB folks. I emailed the vendor form to psvendor@sao.ga.gov on Monday at 8:30, but did not get an acknowledgement. Should they resend?
So we have, I see Christy on there. Go ahead, Christy.
No, you don't have to resend. We should have an automatic response when you send something to our PS vendor mailbox. But if you do not, no, you don't have to resend. Like I said, give us maybe like a week and a half. And if you haven't gotten a response by then you can follow up on the status. But we already have a lot of requests, and we're getting a lot of that were forwarded from OPB directly to us. So most likely we have yours. Just give us about a week and a half to process, and then we can determine if yours is in our queue or not.
Two things.
Yeah, I was going to say, we have had several that have come straight to OPB, and we have forwarded those to SAO on their behalf. So that could be why. When we forward them over, we get an automatic response. So that could be why.
Two things that came up yesterday when I spoke to the Georgia City County managers. One was about revenue replacement. If revenue replacement then becomes your money, our opinion is that it would. Therefore, you would have more flexibility because you're being reimbursed for lost revenue. It does not require you to use reimbursement for lost revenue for a specific purpose. The other is, can you hire staff to help you manage this? It appears that you can. Clearly, administrative staff and administrative support personnel are an eligible use of the funds. Even to rehire people whose jobs were cut back or eliminated is also an eligible use. So it does appear that you could use a portion of your funds to have staff help manage this undertaking. Well, listen, I know we're a little bit over. I want to thank everyone for your time and attention today. We hope this has been helpful to you. Understand we're going to continue to all learn and share information as we go through this. Please continue to reach out to us. We have a list of all the questions that have been applied. We'll make sure we answer those today or in the future. Ask us any additional questions. If you have ideas of how this could be made more useful, we can share those with NLC and share those with Treasury. We'll continue to have other updates. We're having in-person district meetings starting very soon around the state. Make sure you come to those because we'll always be giving the most current information to our members. Again, email us, let us know how we can help you. Thank you for joining us today. Have a great rest of your Wednesday afternoon. Goodbye.